The scream never came. That's what struck the neighbors the most. No crying, no running, no sound at all. Just a little girl in a pink dress, standing barefoot on the warm concrete of a quiet suburban street, her fingers laced against her chest like she was saying a silent prayer. And behind her, a thunder of motion. A grizzly bear, impossibly large and ragged, tore down the sidewalk, muscles coiled beneath sunlit fur, claws scraping the pavement with each lunging step. Its breath hitched in primal rhythm, its eyes wild with something no one could name. And yet she didn't flinch, not even when it closed the final few feet between them. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically, spitting out water in neat arcs over green grass. A dog barked once, then fell quiet. Birds took flight from a tree, as if sensing something the humans hadn't. Mothers froze at kitchen windows. A jogger dropped his phone. Somewhere across the street, a man whispered her name, too softly to be heard. But none of it mattered now. All that mattered was the space between the child and the beast, a breath's width between wonder and terror, between instinct and innocence. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a fable. This was a Tuesday morning, in a neighborhood where nothing ever happened, until it did. And what happened next would leave an entire town questioning everything they thought they knew, about fear, about instinct, and about the silent language that exists between the wild and the pure. Emily was the kind of child who rarely needed to be told to play quietly. At just 4 years old, she had the calm curiosity of someone much older, the kind of wonder that didn't scream for attention, but simply observed the world like it was a secret waiting to be understood. Most mornings, she could be found just outside the porch, kneeling in the grass, watching ants march or lining up wildflowers along the edge of the path. Her pink sandals were always a little muddy, her dress never quite wrinkle-free, but there was something deliberate in her stillness, as if she understood that the world revealed its best stories only when you were very, very quiet. The family had moved just a few months earlier, drawn to the peace of a quiet neighborhood where mailboxes wore ivy and neighbors waved with the kind of friendliness that didn't need words. The home stood shoulder to shoulder with tidy driveways and flowering shrubs, and just beyond the last row of houses, a thick stretch of forest curved around the horizon like a protective wall. For most people, it was just background, a patch of green to frame their routines. But to Emily's father, it was a canvas of stories waiting to unfold. He was a wildlife photographer, often gone for days, returning with his boots dirty and his camera full. He'd sit at the edge of Emily's bed and share his favorite moments. The gentle way a mother bear cradled her cub, the silent power of a wolf stepping across snow, the hush of a forest before dawn. Emily never interrupted. She'd hold her breath as he described the shimmer of fur in low light or the hush of leaves under padded paws. He told her that wild animals didn't just survive. They remembered, they felt, they waited. And somewhere, just beyond that tree-line, something was beginning to move. Not with the slow grace of curiosity, but with a restlessness that didn't belong. It was the kind of shift the birds felt before the humans did, the kind of weight in the air that made squirrels vanish and the wind carry an unfamiliar tension. Something was stirring in the woods, something wild, something displaced. And though no one in the neighborhood sensed it yet, the calm they cherished was already starting to crack. In the dense heart of the forest where the scent of pine once hung thick and uninterrupted, a grizzly moved alone his path, no longer shaped by instinct, but by disruption. He was a male in his prime, massive and powerful, but marked by exhaustion. His coat, which had once gleamed under mountain sun, was now dull, streaked with soot and dirt, and his movements held the weight of a creature displaced. For weeks his home had been shrinking trees, falling not from seasons, but from saws and fire-devouring paths he once knew. The familiar trails were gone, replaced by ash and echo. He hadn't meant to wander so far. He'd followed scent trails that ended in smoldering log streams that ran dry where they once sang in silence, where his kin should have been. Hunger clung to him, a persistent ache that made every decision foggy and sharp at once. He wasn't hunting, he was searching not just for food, but for a rhythm that had once made sense. Each step took him further from wildness and closer to a world that pulsed with unfamiliar sounds and strange smells. Wildlife officers had been aware of him for days, watching the erratic signals of motion-triggered cameras, noting patterns that weren't patterns at all. He was drifting with no destination, skirting the edges of hiking trails, slipping past ranger stations, appearing once beside a gas station dumpster, before vanishing again into underbrush. They tried to track him, hoping to redirect his path or safely sedate him, but he moved like water, always one step beyond their reach. Then one morning a camera hidden along a narrow trail near the edge of the suburb flickered to life. The bear passed within feet of it, slow, deliberate, his shoulders rising and falling with heavy breaths. His eyes didn't carry rage, they carried weight, a loneliness thick as fog. Behind him broken branches swayed in his wake, and ahead lay a world he didn't understand, paved and humming and unaware. He didn't come to conquer or to strike fear. He came because there was nowhere else to go. And just beyond the last shadow of the trees waited a street lined with painted mailboxes and the distant laughter of children. It was the kind of morning that passed without notice, the kind people lived through 100 times and never remembered. The sun had risen soft and golden, casting long shadows across the neighborhood lawns. A breeze teased the leaves just enough to make them flutter like whispered secrets, and birds chirped from the rooftops as if announcing nothing more than another peaceful day. Inside her home, Emily's mother balanced a phone between her ear and shoulder, her voice distracted as she flipped through papers on the kitchen counter. Behind her, the screen door creaked open, then clicked shut again, but she didn't turn. Emily stepped barefoot onto the cool concrete path, her pink dress brushing against her knees as she wandered toward the edge of the yard. She wasn't heading anywhere in particular, just moving, as she often did, quietly, curiously drawn to the sunlight filtering through the trees at the far end of the street. Across the road, an elderly neighbor pushing a wheelbarrow paused and squinted toward the tree line. He caught a flicker of movement, something large, something that didn't quite fit. But he blinked, and it was gone, hidden by the sway of overgrown shrubs. Probably a deer, he muttered, brushing it off as he turned back toward his garden. At that moment, 2 dogs behind a backyard fence erupted into a frenzy of barking, their high-pitched yelps cutting sharply through the quiet morning. The birds scattered, and from the green thicket at the far end of the cul-de-sac, the bear emerged. It stumbled into the open, not with a roar, but with a heavy, confused motion, its head low, its breath ragged. The sudden noise had jolted it from the safety of cover, triggering the only thing it could trust now, movement. It wasn't charging with intent. It was reacting with fear. Its massive frame lunged forward, clumsy and powerful, sweeping into the neighborhood like a storm that hadn't been forecast. The bear saw fences, cars, yards, but none of it made sense. And standing quietly on the sidewalk, not 20 steps away, stood Emily, motionless, her hands tucked close to her chest, her wide eyes staring into something far more ancient than anything she'd ever seen in her father's photo books. The world around her was about to change forever. Emily didn't scream. She didn't cry or call for her mother. She simply stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, her tiny form wrapped in pink cotton, her bare feet pressed flat against the warm pavement. Her eyes locked onto the enormous shape charging toward her, but there was no panic in her face, only something quieter, something deeper, like she was remembering a secret she had been told a long time ago. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, soft and steady from nights spent listening to stories, whispered by the glow of a bedside lamp. He had spoken about the wild with reverence, not fear. About bears especially. He said they were not monsters, not villains, but old spirits of the forest that listened more than they roared. He had told her once, with unusual seriousness, that if she ever found herself close to one, never scream, never run. Just stand still. Just look. Animals understand stillness. They feel it like truth. The bear slowed. Its breath came in sharp burst, steam rising from its nostrils in the cool morning air. Its eyes searched wildly until they found hers, and then everything stopped. It was only a second, but it stretched impossibly long. From the surrounding homes, voices erupted. Sharp gasps, frantic shouts, windows flung open, parents pointing, hands trembling. Someone called her name again and again, but Emily didn't flinch. The bear shifted its weight and let out a heavy snort, dust rising from the road beneath its paws. It raised one paw slightly, as if unsure of its next step, then slowly lowered it. Its eyes never left hers. In that fragile space between them, something unspoken passed. It wasn't recognition in the human sense, but it was something close. The bear's confusion softened. Its tension eased not fully but enough. The wild did not retreat, but it no longer advanced. Emily blinked once slowly, and the bear responded not with force, but with stillness of its own. Two lives that should have never met held each other in quiet regard at the intersection of fear and innocence. There was no growl, no scream, just breathing, and the strange, unbearable weight of a moment that shouldn't have been possible, yet was unfolding before a stunned and silent world. The sound of tires crunching gravel cut through the stillness as a ranger vehicle rolled to a stop just beyond the curve of the street. Two figures in uniform stepped out quickly, but quietly their movements practiced, and calm, their eyes locked on the impossible scene unfolding before them. One reached for the tranquilizer rifle, while the other raised a hand to keep curious onlookers from getting any closer. Emily still stood unmoving, her small frame barely casting a shadow in the soft morning light. The bear remained frozen to its sides, heaving with slow, labored breaths, its great head tilted slightly, as if still trying to understand the presence of this quiet child who hadn't screamed. From the front porch, Emily's mother bolted out of the house, her phone clattering onto the steps behind her. She was barefoot, shouting her daughter's name, her face streaked with tears, but a ranger gently caught her arm and held her back, whispering something she couldn't hear. She resisted at first, but stopped when she saw Emily turn her head ever so slightly, not in fear, but with a calmness that defied everything. The ranger with the tranquilizer stepped forward, slowly lowering to one knee and aiming carefully. A soft thwip cut the air as the dart flew and struck the bear gently in the upper flank. The animal flinched, grunted, and turned its head not toward the ranger, but back to Emily. And in that moment something shifted. The bear blinked once, its gaze steady, not panicked. Then it exhaled a long, heavy breath and began to wobble its weight, swaying with the sedative's pull. It didn't thrash or run. It didn't growl or snap. It took one last look at the girl, its expression unreadable but strangely quiet, and then collapsed slowly onto its side, the thud of its body more like a sigh than a fall. Emily finally took a step backward, then another, until she turned and walked slowly toward her mother, who now stood sobbing quietly, her arms outstretched. The child reached her, without a word, nestling against her chest, as if waking from a dream. The street filled with voices again, cameras, flashing phones, recording, neighbors stunned into whispers. But Emily said nothing. She only looked back once more at the bear, now sleeping just feet from the sidewalk, as if it had always belonged there between the forest and the world. The quiet neighborhood that once prided itself on stillness found itself thrust into a spotlight it never expected. Within hours, the footage had spread beyond the town limits, shared first by neighbors, then picked up by local news, and soon after by national outlets. Headlines ran wild with variations of the same astonishing truth. Girl faces bear, lives to tell the tale. The image of Emily standing inches from a charging grizzly became a symbol of something both terrifying and strangely beautiful. News anchors debated the moment with wide eyes and tight voices. Some experts dismissed it as blind luck, others pointed to instinctual freeze responses in children. But a few looked deeper, questioning if perhaps there was something more, something intangible that had passed between the child and the creature. Emily herself didn't offer much. When asked, she simply said he looked sad, and left it at that. No one pressed her further. The bear was safely relocated to a wildlife sanctuary several hundred miles north. A team of conservationists oversaw the process, ensuring he would live out his life in a vast natural habitat far from human settlements. He arrived quietly and adapted quickly, never showing signs of aggression again. Meanwhile, the town began to change. Petitions were drafted to protect the forest boundaries that had been slowly thinning due to development. People who once saw the woods as nothing more than background began walking its edges with reverence. Children spoke about the bear not with fear, but with awe. The encounter had not only spared two lives, it had sparked a shift in perception. A single moment between wild and child had reminded an entire community that the line between nature and home is far thinner than they had ever imagined. At the sanctuary, nestled deep within a protected valley, the bear found a new rhythm. His days were no longer filled with confusion and noise, but with wide open spaces and quiet trails that curved through thick groves of pine and maple. Staff named him Harrow, though no one really knew why. He responded to nothing in particular, yet moved with a gentle awareness that made him oddly easy to trust. Unlike other rescues who remained cautious or distant, Harrow adapted quickly. He didn't pace the fences or shy away from human presence. On days when families visited the viewing platforms, he often emerged from the trees and sat in view, not performing, not hiding, just there. He would watch the children with an unreadable gaze, his massive form still and composed. Some of the workers joked he liked the sound of laughter. Others weren't so sure. They said he seemed like an animal who had seen something no one could explain. One afternoon, months after the incident, Emily's father drove quietly to the sanctuary. He brought his camera out of habit, but never raised it to his eye. Instead, he stood near the edge of the observation trail, hands resting on the railing, eyes fixed on the bear who sat alone near the pond. For nearly an hour, neither of them moved much. The wind stirred the trees, and the world continued on around them, but something unspoken filled the space between man and animal. Later at home, he told Emily in a quiet voice that the bear looked different now. Not softer exactly, just aware, as if part of him remembered. Not the fear, not the chase, but the stillness. That impossible moment when everything else had fallen away, and two worlds had seen each other clearly. We often speak of the wild as something fierce, as something to be feared or conquered. Teeth and claw storms and shadows, a world untamed, and always just beyond control. But sometimes the truest measure of wildness isn't how loudly it roars, but how quietly it chooses not to. That morning on the street, something ancient unfolded, not in violence, but in pause. A child stood inches from the primal heart of nature and met it not with terror, but with stillness. She didn't run, didn't scream. She simply was. And in that silence, something deeper spoke. The bear did not act as expected. He did not lash out or retreat. He paused too. In his confusion, he saw not threat, not prey, but presence. And instead of chaos, he chose peace. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was something else. But whatever passed between them left more than just a headline. It left a question echoing in the hearts of all who watched. What if the wild isn't only about survival? What if it's also about recognition, the quiet moment when one life sees another and chooses not to harm? Months later, Emily walks that same sidewalk again. The hedges are trimmed, the lawns neat, the world unchanged on the surface. But when she passes the tree line, she still slows, just for a moment. She looks toward the shadows of the woods, not in fear, but with a soft kind of knowing. And sometimes she smiles. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to our channel, where we share true moments that reveal the quiet strength of nature and the unexpected grace within it. Your support through every like, share, and comment helps us continue bringing these powerful stories to light. Stories that remind us of the fragile connection between the wild and the human heart. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop believing in the silent power of compassion.